Well, it's October, which is the start of the best month of the year, because for me, October is basically a 31-day build-up to my favorite holiday, Halloween. And to celebrate, every episode this month will feature movies that have a connection to Halloween, and I'm going to start with one of my favorites, a movie set on Halloween night that doesn't feature killer clowns, zombies, or guys wearing William Shatner masks. In fact, this movie has very little violence in it at all, except of course for the 12 guys who were poisoned and then buried in the basement. So join me as I dig up 13 facts about the 1944 classic Arsenic and Old Lace.
Well, insanity runs in my family. It practically gallops.
Before it hit the big screen, Arsenic and Old Lace started as a play by Joseph Kesselring, and while the story is a work of fiction, the inspiration for a pair of sweet, murderous old ladies was likely a real murder case. Between 1907 and 1917, 60 deaths occurred at the Archer home, a nursing home run by Amy Archer Gilligan in Windsor, Connecticut. Now, a relative of one of the men who died in the home grew suspicious when their previously healthy brother died suddenly. Letters from the brother showed that he died shortly after being pressured to give Amy money. When relatives of other people who died also reported that Amy Archer Gilligan received money from them shortly before they died, the families pressured the local DA to launch an investigation. The investigation found that the boarders and even Amy's late husband had all been poisoned with either arsenic or strychnine, poisons all purchased by or for Amy Archer Gilligan. With their evidence, the police were able to arrest and convict her, ultimately leading to a life sentence. Kesselring's play opened on Broadway in January 1941, and it was an immediate hit, running for a total of 1,444 performances. Now, many of the cast members from the play were asked to reprise their roles in the movie, including Josephine Hull and Gina Dare as Abby and Martha Brewster, and John Alexander as Teddy Roosevelt Brewster. Another cast member from the play who wanted to be in the movie was Boris Karloff as the black sheep brother Jonathan Brewster. Unfortunately for Karloff, he was the headliner for the show, and the show's producers didn't want to let him leave the production so he could film the movie. To free him up, Warner Brothers even offered Humphrey Bogart to replace Karloff temporarily in the play, but the play's producers turned the offer down. So, since they couldn't get Karloff for the movie, director Frank Capra cast Raymond Massey in the part. Karloff was disappointed he wasn't allowed to be in the movie, which was also a blow since there are several jokes in the script about how botched plastic surgeries have left Jonathan looking like Boris Karloff.
Gee, do I have to, Sarge? Look at that puss. He looks like Boris Karloff.
The references to Karloff are such a big part of the script that Warner Brothers lawyers were nervous that Boris Karloff would sue them if he wasn't in the movie. But Karloff was a good sport about it, and he signed the release, letting them use his name and likeness in the movie. Production on Arsenic and Old Lace began in October of 1941. To keep the movie from cannibalizing ticket sales for the Broadway show, the movie's producers agreed not to release the movie in the theaters until the Broadway show closed, which finally happened nearly 3 years later on June 17, 1944. When the play closed, the movie was released in the theaters just 3 months later in September 1944. Now, that's not to say no one saw the movie before 1944. Jack Warner actually released the film in 1943 to show to American and British troops stationed overseas during World War II. Director Frank Capra wasn't aware that Jack Warner had released the film to the armed forces until he was in London and he heard soldiers yelling "Charge!" like Teddy does.
Charge!
When he heard the soldiers quoting that line, he guessed that they had somehow seen the film, something the team at Warner Brothers confirmed did happen. Speaking of Frank Capra, he saw Arsenic and Old Lace as a chance to shift gears. Before this film, he'd made a series of films focused on serious and moral issues like Lost Horizon, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, and Meet John Doe. and he's quoted as saying that Arsenic and Old Lace was no great document to save the world, and it contained no worries about whether John Doe should or should not jump. It was just good, old-fashioned theater. He also said it was the most fun he'd had making a movie since he shot It Happened One Night in 1934. Frank Capra may have had a ball making Arsenic and Old Lace, but his star, Cary Grant, had a very different experience. Capra encouraged Grant to play the part big and with lots of energy, but as the production went along, Grant and screenwriter Julius Epstein both felt he was overacting. Capra agreed, and he told them that he'd downplay any over-the-top moments either in editing or with some reshoots. Unfortunately, production ended on Arsenic and Old Lace on December 16, 1941, just 9 days after the attack on Pearl Harbor. With the attack, the United States entered into the war. Frank Capra enlisted in the Army, and he asked for 6 weeks to finish this movie before reporting to duty. He spent those 6 weeks getting the footage he shot edited and locked in, but he didn't have time to edit out all the over-the-top moments or schedule any reshoots, so all of those moments stayed in. Cary Grant said he felt miscast in the role and that this was one of his least favorite performances. He thought Alan Jocelyn, who played the role on Broadway, or even Jimmy Stewart would have been a better fit. He didn't do much to hide his irritation during the production either. He often complained about the set, the props, and the wardrobe. He also was heard saying he'd rather have appeared in the film version of Noel Coward's Blight Spirit instead. Now, even though he wasn't thrilled with the film, some good did come out of Cary Grant's performance. He donated at least $100,000 of his salary for doing the film to war relief charities, including the British War Relief, the USO, and the Red Cross. Arsenic and Old Lace was also something of a reunion for Cary Grant. 20 years before production on the film began, Grant was a young vaudeville performer, and while on a theatrical tour, he got rheumatic fever. Now, another member of the tour, Jean Adair, took care of him and nursed him back to health. Jean, of course, played Cary Grant's Aunt Martha in Arsenic and Old Lace. Over the time it took Aunt Martha and Aunt Abby to commit the 12 murders they did, they continued to refine the recipe for the poison they gave to their victims.
For a gallon of elderberry wine, I take 1 teaspoonful of arsenic, then add half a teaspoonful of strychnine, and then just a pinch of cyanide.
Should have quite a kick.
The Production Code Administration sent a recommendation that this sequence not be included in the film. They were concerned that audience members might try to make and use the recipe themselves. The recommendation was heard, it was ignored, and the sequence was left in the film. The Brewster house was built on a soundstage at Warner Brothers, and at the time, it was the largest set built on the lot. The house was designed from sketches by Frank Capra, and it allowed him to shoot both exteriors and interiors on the same stage. Now, a couple of the scenes, like the one at the baseball game and at the marriage license office, were shot either on location or on different stages, but nearly all of the rest of the movie was shot on this one stage. Now, for the exterior scenes in the graveyard and around the house, bags of leaves were actually brought in and swirled around by 3 wind machines to give the set a real autumn Halloween look. And if you look closely in those graveyard scenes, you might spot a gravestone with Archie Leach engraved on it. Archie Leach, of course, was Cary Grant's real name, and having a tombstone with his name on it was kind of an inside joke. A year earlier, while shooting His Girl Friday, Grant said this.
Well, that isn't gonna help you this time. You're through.
Listen, the last man who said that to me was Archie Leach just a week before he cut his throat.
That's so.
And to complete the gag, the unfortunate Mr. Leach was buried in the graveyard in Arsenic and Old Lace. For the interior shots, be sure to look out for the telephone the family uses. The phone was Bell's new French model that combined the microphone and the earpiece into the same unit. Now, this is a very early example of product placement. Typically, the Bell Company would have paid for some of the advertising costs of the movie in exchange for them showcasing their products, like this French phone, in the film. And finally, there are several great ad-libs in Arsenic and Old Lace, but for me, I like to see the goofs that got left in. And my favorite goof is towards the end of the movie when Mr. Witherspoon from the asylum heads upstairs to help Teddy pack. As he picks up the bugle, he also straightens up a glass that has fallen over. And if you listen carefully, you can hear Cary Grant off camera ask if he was supposed to do that.
He stops to do that.
And there you have it, my list of some great, useless trivia about Arsenic and Old Lace. As always, if you have a favorite piece of trivia about this movie that I didn't include, please let me know in the comments below. And don't forget, I post a new episode every Monday morning, so please be sure to subscribe if you'd like to get an alert when my new videos go live. And finally, thank you again for watching A Million Movies, and I hope to see you again here soon.